The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for making it to BGA's Trailblazer webinar series today. We really appreciate having you guys on board. These are quite uncertain times, of course, and understandably, people are trying to do the best to learn new things and gain new skills. And what better way to do that than hopping on one of these webinars where faculty from BGA schools can share their research and their findings. And today we have Dr. Ali Radfard from Aston Business School, who will share a little bit of information on a forward-looking behavioral decision-making theory. So without much further ado, Dr. Radford, you can take the stage.
Thank you, Victor, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for listening to me today. I hope it's a useful talk for everyone, and I can learn also from your insights. So this paper is part of, the research that I'm presenting to you today is part of a bigger project that I started with my PhD thesis when I was doing my PhD in Bocconi University. In the project, I was looking at the role of time in measured decisions in governance. And in that, not only time as it's shown by the clock, but also as it's understood by all of us. So today I talk to you about part of this project that deals with the future or lack of foresight in our decision making, with majority decisions being reactions to what has happened rather than what is going to happen in the future. So I will tell you about the organization of the talk. So first I discuss the issue with the currently dominant decision-making theory. Then I say actually how we are making the decisions by going a little bit into depths of the current descriptions and prescriptions for decision-making. And finally, I would discuss how we should make decisions, showing the results of a research I've done in this project, and also part of the big project that would support these findings. So to discuss the issue, consider the simple timeline drawn in here. It can be seen that at the point of decision, we could face two directions. Toward the left, we have the past, and toward the right, we have the future. The past is ideally known, and at least there is potential to know all the past. The future is obviously the unknown. Now, theories have described our decision making in two ways, considering this axis is in the middle of and at the center of these theories. Actually, we can say theories have had two generations in describing our decision making. Early in decision theory, it could be the case that due to stability and little dynamism, we could say and talk of time not affecting the contextual factor very much, and everything, including the validity of information that we make our decisions by, remaining the same pretty much or changing very little. In this type of view, we can be rational, meaning that we can make decisions by picking the global maxima in a specific choice set, and choose the kind of option that maximizes our, as the economists call it, utilities, and use calculations, complex calculations, to learn about the unknown. In this actually view, things can be considered timeless, and unknown is unknown because it still hasn't been experienced. So in here, it's about timelessness in a sense. Now, with this much concerns and uncertainty and anxiety about the future, one can see and infer that the stability era is long due, so it's no more the stability era. Later came a more realistic version of taking into account of rapid change. This is what we have been facing for at least 50 years, with so many things being changed due to the tremendous pace of dynamism, and with time significantly changing the contextual factors in decision, including the validity of information that we have at each point of time and how they apply to the future. In here, we can be rational, but this rationality is not the hyper-rationality in the first model. It's instead, our intended rational. We can intend to be rational based on the incompleteness and limits that we have. We can use the wisdom of the past, what we know, to avoid the future uncertainty. Clearly, we have a problem in here. The thing is, we decide for what we don't know or for the unknown with what we know or the known, while these known and unknown are different. So I talk to you more about this by discussing how we make decisions. So I elaborate a little bit more on these two views that I discussed already, and the issue would become more clear. When there is no time, or there is timelessness and world is stable, everything is known or can be known. In other words, we have the following model. We use relevant information and feed them into a rational calculus, which can tell us what is best to do or what maximizes our utility function. So obviously, this is an ideal way of making decisions, but has one big caveat or problem. The decision-making criteria in this model and for this model to work the best should remain constant and unchanged. So, there should be no uncertainty. Cases of failure of this type of ideal decision making can be seen in many contemporary examples where decisions based on the so-called precise information has led to quite different outcomes than those expected. Financial crisis of 2008, for example, was when rational choice theories of decision were seriously criticized for putting humans in a social and temporal vacuum where no one faces any limits or constraints in knowing the relevant information and understanding them at the same time, whether due to social embeddedness or temporality. So despite all this, rational model of decision making is still relevant as an ideal, typical, case of decision making. The word, after all, proved to be not that easy. We may like and intend to be rational, but we face limitation in this and therefore can only be boundedly rational. We may like to ignore time, but we can't, as reality is diffuse over time, and we can only make sense of things by using references and relative understanding of information. So based on this, the behavioral decision theories describe our decision making. And as I need to emphasize here, it is a descriptive view. It doesn't mean that the researchers that first introduced this theory thought that this is the way to make decisions, but this is a description of how people were making decisions. We use noisy information and incomplete information and our limited processing capacity of that noisy information, and use comparison and references from the past with rule of thumbs and make decisions. The main rule here is we have an expectation that satisfies us, not maximizing our well-being or our utility, and make changes if that expectation is not met. Then we observe our performance feedback, and this cycle goes on and on. We just use what we have experienced or look back for to try to adapt to changing criteria and environment in this model. Problem in here is a serious one. We can't do things for their consequences, but instead for our satisfaction. So in other words, we are being blind to what happens and just react to everything that happens. A clear lack of foresight that is really dangerous. Examples of this can be seen in these days even. We never expected such pandemic to hit us this way, because we were so focused on doing what satisfies us, leaving the future to time to decide how it should be. And we being just a reactive species, like in the evolutionary models of behavior. Now, examples of this lack of foresight can also be seen in business world. For example, Kodak failed as a result of being so reactive and myopic and ignoring the threat of digital photography for at least 10 years. This came amidst the fact that Kodak was a dominant player in the traditional black and white film kind of photography. Similarly, Nokia, as a dominant player in cell phone market prior to the smartphone dominance, was only reactive and ignored the threat of smartphones. And then we had these two big and dominant corporations failing due to this kind of lack of foresight. But expectations of us are that some people should do the decisions with foresight. No, so this is true. Exceptions exist, for example, among CEOs who make decisions based on foresight. I don't know how many of you have watched Bill Gates' TED Talk about coronavirus pandemic, for example, but he actually had a foresight for it. But how can one have foresight? And even so, is it any useful to make decisions with foresight? So in here, entering theories that are emerging and then discussing my own framework. Emerging theories of decision tell us that for making decisions based on foresight, we should cognitively represent the future. That is, we need to form mental models of the future, acknowledging that decision criteria change. I now explain how this is done by proposing a forward-looking behavioral decision-making framework in the coming slides. So, cognitive representation of the future and forward-looking decision should be based on either analogical thinking or a local search of a representation space, or cognitive representation space. So analogy is what Hume was kind of the father of this type of thinking, as we know. So analogy is about applying rules from a context to a different context by focusing on similarities between the two contexts. For example, you experience, riding a motorcycle, then this experience you believe that is similar to driving a car, and then you use your experience in riding, a bicycle or a motorcycle to drive the car. So this is a type of, analogical thinking. It may fail, it may be very useful, but we, have this as a tool for foresight. The other way is local search of a representation space. It's about incremental change in representing the future by modifying our mental models as we face different situations. So in here, it's a diffusion or a kind of mixture of the past and future. So you have a set of beliefs. With that, you have a kind of a space that reality happens on. And then when you face new information that contradicts with what you think the reality is, you change your representation of reality or the future, the way, the timeless kind of reality at the same time. The question in here, the big question in here is, how are the cognitive representations of the future actually formed and translated into behavioral outcomes? So in what follows, I would explain my logic based on the existing emerging theories and foundations. So the main proposition here, the simplified proposition here, is that the framework for decision making based on foresight, although being a behavioral decision making, should be a reference independent framework, therefore similar to the backward-looking decision-making framework, but with the difference that is in the future. So in here, the core logic is that the issue, the core issue is that the shared foundation of all we face in our life is collective constructions. As it's shown by its name, collective construction is the joint creation of meaning for phenomena. In fact, not only the joint creation of meaning, but also to a good extent, the joint creation of the world as it stands. So my core logic is that the case, that this is the case with time, including the future, that everything, meaning that collective construction also constructs time. Apart from what the future actually is, we collectively create a future by first designing it at each point of time and then moving toward materialization of that design. Of course, then there is a dialectical relationship between time and collective construction. Collective construction creates time, and time changes collective construction. This is, you know, this requires a little bit more of elaboration and explanation. So when we say the collective construction of future or of time, what we are exactly talking about. So, you know, there is an actual future that comes someday, and as we experience time and the passage of time. But even now, when you think about the future, just right now, try to think about the future, and you would have a kind of, you know, understanding of how it is, or an expectation of how it should be. You even have, because the future and the past does not exist anymore at the present, right? So you even have the same with the past. So there is a kind of abstract understanding of the past in your mind too. These concepts, these abstract understandings is discussed here, are also constructs that you know, are created by a collectivity or by a society, right? So you interact with other people, and this interaction with other people would create a kind of conception or a kind of idea of what the future or the past is, regardless of what the future or the past actually is, right? So this is important to note in here. So to elaborate more and to illustrate the key logic in here, I need to show you this. So in this circle, we have a slow changing layer, the society or the collectivity that designs and creates all that is in time, including past, present, and future. The temporal layer that is about change and dynamism is surrounded by the slow changing layer of collectivity. So in my framework, I draw from this slow moving layer to cope with the dynamic layer, right? So it is about, you know, because up to now, our problem was that obviously as the future is dynamic, we can't take any hold on it. In here, the stable kind of context or stable body, that the perimeter of this circuit is giving us that tool, I believe, to see and to kind of leverage the dynamic part, which is the temporality or the past, present, and future. So let me now move to the explain a little bit more the social or collective construction and the way it increases the possibility for cognitive representation of the future. First, we should know that two important elements in social construction are a schema or a schemata and similarity. Schema are like molds, right, that form everything and discipline it by dictating expectations on it, right? So what does it exactly mean? So think of a schema exactly as a mold that when it's put on something, it limits the boundaries of freedom of what is trapped inside it, and it would dictate what are the boundaries that this trapped entity can span, or how far this entity can go. So this is the molding role of a schemata or schema. The similarity is what tells us who should receive the same schema, right? If a person that is similar to us is treated with a specific schema, we should expect to face those same schema, right? So similarity, what does similarity mean in here? It's more about the kind of social similarity. So social similarity being across all type of attributes, being it the gender, being it the social class, being it the roles, or many other things, even the color of hair, the color of eye. It depends. It really depends on how much deep or how fine-grained is the kind of similarity determination practiced by the society. This gives birth to the possibility of vicarious experience of time, and more specifically the future in here. So in here, rules are the same via similarity schema channel, whereas the implementation of rules are temporally diffused within each similarity category. So as we said, so the schema tells us that the rules for each category that are formed of similar entities are the same, but the important point here is that it doesn't happen at the same time. So the rules are not implemented on everyone, for everyone at the same time, right? So it may be the case that I'm similar to someone else, the schema or schemata are first applied to me, then 10 days from now they are applied to whoever who is similar to me. So this gives the kind of temporal diffusion, which also includes type of anticipation and materialized expectation. So with this in mind, we should now be ready to see the framework. The framework looks like the following kind of feedback loop. So we have, again, limited information processing capacity. This moves toward references and heuristics, rule of thumbs, right? So simplified rules of thumbs instead of complex calculations. And in here, what is different is that there is a collective construction of future that is fed into this framework, and then this creates the reference-dependent decision-making capable of being foresight-enabled, right, or being anticipatory. So this collectively constructed future makes it possible for us to use references from the future, and then we receive the feedback, performance feedback, which in turn can make us want to change the collectively constructed future, and also at the same time, obviously, we change the set of information that we see the world with, right? Because this is the performance feedback of our, our strategy, our actions. So this should tell us how accurate our beliefs were, right? So with this framework, now I shall move to explain to you that the kind of designs that experimental, empirical designs that I used to test this framework. So I should have shown that this is actually a model, the model that I described, that explains some actual decisions. And if so, I should also have shown how it compares to the backward-looking model in terms of outcomes, right? So the treatment that was used in a field experimental quasi-natural experiment and field experimental design, the treatment was the dismissal of a peer who could then or the dismissal could then make cognitive representation of future salient by virtue of visibility of social construction process. So as you've seen here, in the left side, or the treatment group, and on the right side on the control group. On the left side, there is the treatment of peer dismissal. So these guys are, in my case, CEOs who work for, who are at the top of their corporations, and then one of their peers, one of their similar beings are dismissed, right? So this is used to manipulate the cognitive representation of the future, right? And on the right-hand side, we have the same CEOs that are, matched with the left-hand side CEOs who don't receive this treatment, right? So the important thing in here is that we should make sure that this treatment actually manipulates what we want, or the cognitive representation of the future via the socially constructed, phenomenon. And we should also be able to rule out the psychological alternative, and also show that the treatment, the natural kind of experiment treatment, is indeed an exogenous treatment, right? So I did this using a future time perspective survey on a smaller sample of these observations, and tried to check whether they actually form, or the cognitive representation of the future, or actually whether the cognitive representation of the future becomes salient after receiving this treatment, right? The other thing I did for ruling out the psychological alternative was psychoanalytics, so content analysis of communications of these CEOs, right? So trying to figure out their psychological attributes and ruling out their, psychological attributes from the channel of decision making that we are discussing here. The next step for assuming exogeneity of the treatment or the dismissal was to design a kind of cross-check. The cross-check was the fact that prior to 2002, during the Enron kind of scandal and stuff. So before 2002, the rules for governance were set in a way that CEO dismissal was not really a threat for CEOs, because boards of directors were more dependent on the CEOs, and then the CEOs had the main saying and main power. But after 2002, by the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, dismissal became a salient and real threat for CEOs. So this is shown by many prior research. So what is happening here is that we are seeing a difference when the treatment was not still implemented versus when the treatment is implemented for both groups. So what we do is we observe the outcome for the control group and the treatment group prior to the treatment area, and also after that, and we compare the differences and see if the differences between the two outcomes in before and after the treatment are significant, right? The difference in the differences, right? So for this set, for this kind of design, I looked at the performance of the CEOs who were receiving the treatment and those who were not receiving the treatment. And also I looked at some measures of risk-taking and change and some choices. So what I did was a set of regressions. And so in accordance with the design that I had, so I first looked at whether the treatment of peer dismissal and the treatment of cognitive representation of future actually, when is implemented, does it form a type of decision making that I'm discussing in here. So this is one thing I first investigated, and then observed that yes, when you have the treatment, or when you make the cognitive representation of the future salient, this type of model, forward-looking behavioral decision-making framework works and actually explains the outcome, right? The outcome being in here, the risk or the change that people make or the choices they make. At the same time, the other thing that I wanted to know was which one of the two, whether the backward-looking or the forward-looking model works better. So I did this by comparing the performance of the next period of CEOs who received the treatment of cognitive representation of future with the CEOs who didn't receive this, controlling for everything else, right? So, I mean, everything else, meaning that everything that can be controlled for. So this was a very, like, I mean, a whole set of controls and many methods. So, I mean, obviously I haven't put them here because it's a little bit more, it needs a little bit more time to discuss. But of course they are available, and I will be happy also to explain and discuss them with whoever who is interested. So I observed that those CEOs who received this treatment actually performed better than the CEOs who didn't receive this. Next, I should have shown that this is actually due to the decisions that they make via the forward-looking framework compared to the backward-looking framework of the CEOs who didn't receive the treatment. So again, I observed the changes that they made, and then I used mediated kind of regressions to see that if actually this treatment of cognitive representation of the future and this model of forward-looking behavioral decision-making performs better than the backward-looking decision-making. So this was a very strong support for the results. Then the other part that was a thought experiment, and this is a simulation, right? So it's a computational design kind of, if you want. So it was done as part of my bigger project for another paper, and it's just informative, right? Because this talks about on the left side of this pair of panels, you see making decisions based on time as it really is, so not knowing the future or being backward looking. On the right side, you see making decisions with this kind of socially constructed future, right? Or being forward looking, right, in making decisions. The vertical axis in all the graphs shows the performance. The horizontal axis shows the time periods. So in these simulations, you always see that the performance of the group on the right that use the socially constructed future or the forward-looking behavioral decision-making framework was higher significantly than the group that didn't use it, right? So this is, again, this is a simulation. So it's not a kind of real, this part, only this part, because the other parts have real data. This part is a thought experiment. The more you go down these curves, so the first set, the second set, and the third set, the more is the degree of change of reality, right? So via the passage of time, right? So in the second case, it's when just mere passage of time, regardless of whether you know the future and make forward-looking decisions or you make backward-looking decisions, the real kind of thing or the reality changes more than the first case. In the third case, the reality changes very much with the passage of time. So the more the reality changes with the passage of time, the more valuable becomes the forward-looking logic for making decisions, but at the same time, the narrower becomes the margin, right? Because obviously when the reality is very dynamic, that you can't make any sense of anything at any point of time, then it would be a very difficult, task to make decisions regardless of whether you make forward or backward decisions. But in any case, at least to a moderate level, when the reality doesn't change like super crazy and super fast, you will see the superiority of that socially constructed forward-looking decision-making framework, right? Via this thought experiment as well. So what are the takeaways of this talk, and what I want to tell you in summary is that forward-looking decisions lead to better outcomes, obviously, as we discussed and showed the results. At the same time, what it implies is that we need to collect social intelligence to find and understand who is more similar to us. So and we need more precision in this stage, right? The better we recognize who is similar to us in terms of social similarity, so the better would be our use of this socially constructed future. Then when we find the socially similar, we need to be very careful and observe their performance on different goals, and with the comparison of their performance with our performance, and with how they were rewarded or punished, we can have a kind of representation of what would happen to us in the future, because these guys are similar and this is happening to them now, so this would happen to us in future. So this is a future that is materialized for us in the present, right? So we need to be careful in observing their performance, and also we need to make decisions with rules of thumbs. That is fine, but we need to replace the past or the backward-looking logic, or relying too much on our experience, with the cognitive future that we can form via these, tools of social construction. So other important thing that exists in here is that as this kind of collective construction of future and the cognitive representation of it is a socially constructed process, we need social agreement. So in here, the importance of symbolic and substantial tools to affect the social construction is very, very crucial. So we need to make those type of or to use those type of tools in reaction to the construction of future that can change the future in the way that we want. For example, I see that the future that is emerging via sensing the social construction is not favorable to me. I need to send a message to the audience, to the social environment, to everyone who is around me, who makes this future, to change this future, or to make an attempt at least to change this future. So I think this is it, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Radfard. Actually, that was a very interesting presentation, and I actually encourage the audience, if you have any questions right now, to submit them, as you do have the opportunity now for the next 10 or so minutes. Just to start off, Dr. Radfard, from my end, what do you think were some of the more challenging aspects of conducting this research?
The challenging aspect, first of all, to be honest, was finding the right treatment, because the logic of the research was a qualitative one, so it required kind of in-depth qualitative study. But obviously, if we wanted generalizability, we needed really a larger scale experiment. So what I did was I first tried to experiment with my surrounding, like a small samples that I had around me. So with the students, with also my friends and others. And then when I kind of formed a type of or validated my my hypothesis, then I started to read more in the academic literature and find the or design a kind of treatment that would give me this nice way of testing this. Obviously, the other challenge was the empirical method altogether, because I needed to do a mix of methods. So content analysis, experimental design, different types of regressions, computational methods. And so, this was a little bit, and survey also design. So this was a little bit too much, but obviously, fortunately, I could manage to go after them and learn many things in this process and do it in the end. I think, yeah, it was a nice experience. Given it was challenging, I had the opportunity to learn a lot from this project.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, we have two questions that have come in. They're quite similar to each other, but they really focus on practitioner use and how it can
Yeah.
you can apply this research. One is more focused on well, in general, practitioner use, and the other question is more
Mhm.
on, say, investing and how it affects the investment strategy in the future and so forth.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So should I hear the question, or should I just respond in?
Yeah, you could. I mean, yeah. One is, could you mention something on practitioner use and
Yeah,
research, and then
sure, sure.
how could you use the research to apply to investment strategies?
Surely. So in terms of the practitioner use, so what I can say is that this is a very, very general and simple thing. Most often we have the material that we want next to us. The most important thing in here is that a practitioner mindset should change in a way that sees the future as something endogenous, meaning that sees future as something that exists right now and is happening to someone who is similar enough to them, right? So and it just needs to be discovered. If we learn enough from the people who are similar to us in many aspects, then we can have the great opportunity of seeing what is going to happen to us in the future without actually needing to experiencing it, right? So the practitioner kind of advice in here would be just try to, as I said, I mean, collect social intelligence and see who is similar to you. Then if you find someone who is similar to you, try to see what happens to their different decisions, right? So obviously, if someone is similar to you, is not supposedly or is not necessarily going to make whatever you decisions that you are doing, right? But they do things that are different from you, and these are the great opportunities for you to see how you would be treated if you make the decisions that they make, right? So this is the advice would be in this case, just try to find the similar or the peer or the mate, and then follow what is happening to them and treat them as your future. If you do so, it is really, really going to be valuable because thought experiment shows it, the data shows it. So it is to a good extent something that can be, prescribed. In terms of investment, so to be honest, I really haven't thought about it very much. But what I can say right now is that, the great thing about markets and in general financial markets and in general investments in whatever sense is the socially constructed nature of prices, right? So, when you are investing, you are more prone to be ruled by the social construction rules, right? By a schema, by by similar rules that are applied to similar categories, by rule of thumbs that are created from a kind of a structure, a social structure, or a type of culture, right? So what is the advice in here is trying to learn the culture first of an investment market, and then make investments. But in particular, I mean, I don't have in mind a very, very specific solution to propose in here, but it's a very interesting question. But the thing that comes to my mind is trying to be more careful about the cultures, studying the culture, studying the structures, social structures, because in markets the social construction is the dominant thing. And recently, for example, I saw a paper working on using this social construction lens in futures markets studies. So, this is there is, I think, an emerging research tradition in also finance that talks about this. But yeah, for now, what I can say is that we should really try to put the culture and to know the social rules first before making any decisions in any investments or in any markets. So because in their social construction is more dominant, even yeah.
This is actually a nice follow-up question to that. What if there are two competing cultures in terms of cognitive cultures here? How does that really affect kind of overall decision-making strategy?
Yeah, very, very actually interesting question. And this is very good that it was asked, because this is actually a paper I'm working on right now. So the thing in here, when you have competing cultures, there is always, I mean, this is even observable in some of the, political communications. Although I know, I mean, this is a different context, like politics, it's a little bit, or maybe sometimes very much different than business. But the competing cultures, the advice for the competing cultures is to try to imply that they are the future of other cultures, right? So when you see the communications between the two cultures, the culture that is successful in dictating the fact that they are the future of the other culture, so this is a little bit more of impression management and communication, this type of things, so this type of fights. The culture that you feel is giving this impression that they are the
I think we lost you there for a second. Okay,
hello, do you
you're
hear
back
me?
on. You're back on.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. So yeah, so the culture that is kind of giving you the impression that they are the future of the other cultures, or the culture that is the role model of other cultures, should be followed, because they would gain the competitive advantage. They would perform better than others in the long run, right? So, but this is a very, very challenging one for also the observer.
I think we lost you again, actually.
It's a very nice question, and it's interesting because I mean, it was a national question for me too, and I followed it, and I'm working on this right now in a different paper.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, one of the things, so if I understand this correctly, you would say that, perhaps the one that promises, let's say, a future that people can, or majority of people can prescribe to, that would be the one that kind of wins that competitive, let's say, between the two. Let's say there are two different thoughts here. The one that kind of promises a future that people prescribe to, or can understand, will be the one that ultimately dominates.
Exactly, Victor. So this is like a contest. So like any social contest, exactly, the one that has more density in terms of the people who subscribe to it would be the superior one, and would be the one who would win in the end. I mean, unless there is something really shocking that happens and changes everything. But this is also the beauty of social construction in general. You have the social movements and everything that can all together radically change everything. So all that was discussed is assuming a stability of social order. If the social order is changed, or if it's broken down, then obviously it's a kind of revolutionary period, so you can't really know who would win. I mean, there are studies showing who would win, but I mean, this is not my, at least, area of expertise, so I can't go there. I mean,
Of course, of course. And in terms of, but this is also another interesting thing that comes up here. That is, of course, you look towards the future, but what tends to have the biggest impact, do you think, in terms of decision making? Do past, let's say, events or behaviors or so forth have a stronger effect, or is that future outlook have a stronger effect, do you think?
Yeah, this is a very important one, indeed. So the thing is, when you compare the making decisions based on or giving more weight to future or forward-looking decision making, you perform better than when you give higher weight to the backward-looking or past-oriented way of making decisions. But this doesn't really tell us that future or past are superior. Indeed, what I was thinking about last night is that after reading some sociology, so the thing is, really, it depends on what is superior or given superiority in the society. In the past, for example, before 17th century, societies were more obsessed with the past. Everyone was thinking about legends, everyone was thinking about, these things. So past was the thing that was the more important thing. Right now, I think we are all somehow, at least I am, obsessed with the future. So we all are anxious. Maybe this is due to the pace that is afforded by technological progress. But whatever it is, I mean, now we give priority to future. Everyone is worried about future. Nobody really, cares that much to the extent that they were caring, for example, prior to 17th century. Not that I have been there, but I mean, reading the text. I think so. This is a matter of how the society treats the past and the future as constructs, not as, the real past and future. Obviously, what we see is that future is superior, but it also depends, and perhaps the impact would change based on the broader, social environment and whether they put higher weight on the past or on the future.
Right, that's so interesting, especially what you mentioned about, in the past where people would value more, the traditions and past things that have happened. Today, you're right, it's very much focused on future only, and people don't really look towards traditions the same way as they would before. I mean, obviously some will, and there will always be an element to it, but we are in a society that is very much focused on what can the future bring, which is not perhaps a bad thing, but who knows? It does change let's say, the social construct of how we engage with each other and how we plan for things.
Exactly. And this is indeed very fascinating. And, in general, the idea that there is a layer of stability and there is the layer of society and collectivity that creates everything is very fascinating. This was the first thing that came to my attention when I was doing my PhD. So because this is really, really fascinating that everything that we make sense of is a social construct. I mean, not everything, but many things, like money, like value, like, I don't know, even time. So this is really fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope others find it fascinating too. So
there's some good books on this. I mean, there was let's see, recently, if you read, you may have read *Sapiens*, but that book did a pretty good job in putting together the kind of social constructs that people put together and how we seem to value things and create these imaginary systems, but they work well when we all agree upon what the rules are.
Exactly. That book is amazing, and yeah, that is a very good kind of thing to know more about social construction. And exactly, there is one interesting thing about social construction is reification. So what it means is that we as humans create something, and then given the way social construction works, we remove our power from the thing that we have constructed, right? So we don't see our hands in constructing this. For example, an interesting thing is that we all may think that social order is something that exists because it has existed, right? But social order is something that is created every day by all of us, right? So I do my role, you do your role, so this is very interesting that we don't see our role in creating the things that bound our life and everything. I mean, so take it for granted and then see this as an external reality, which is not, obviously, because it's created by us. Yeah. Yeah.
That's an incredibly interesting topic, and actually, we unfortunately have to stop the webinar right now. But what I would like to encourage, if you're okay with this, that people can reach out to you and ask any
Sure.
questions, of course, with regards to, your topic of research or anything else surrounding this theme, really, because it's a very interesting topic, and I think only very recently we're making strides into this area of understanding these concepts, social concepts that make human society possible. So and I look forward to your future research as well with regards to the competitive, let's say, or competition between two ideas or systems. So definitely looking forward to that. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to this
Thank
webinar
you.
today. It's been a massive pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. And we'll see you again in the future for our next webinar. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much, everyone. And please feel free to contact me. Cheers.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.